This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
How do you feel about trees?
Trees are where we get the money from. That's where we get the cash, girl. How do I feel about trees? Pretty indifferent, neither here nor there. I mean, I feel like they're important. I have a lot of do I have a lot of respect for trees?
Basically, you just don't think about them.
Yeah, they're an afterthought. It's a good way of
It's
describe
sad,
them.
actually. I'll just tell you something. It's sad. Trees are pretty magical.
Are they?
I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get you there on this episode.
Well, listen, I'm not a forest nymph, so you might have a hard time on this one.
I mean, you look like a forest nymph.
Shout out me. Shout out all my forest nymphs.
So let me tell you a little bit about Nicole Rycroft. So she is a Climate Breakthrough awardee.
Oh.
That will mean nothing to you except if you're fans of Tessa Khan.
If you're fans of saving the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, if you're fans of some of our former guests like Tessa Khan or Bruce Nellis or Zipporah Berman.
Oh, what?
It's a good cohort.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
Oh wow. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. This is a big fish.
Yeah. She's the founder and executive director of a Canadian-based organization called Canopy, which is actually an award-winning nonprofit. Her work focuses on catalyzing commercial production of low carbon and circular clothing, paper, and packaging that does not rely on pulp from ancient and endangered forests.
Oh, what?
She's going to talk about this more, but basically in like not NGO speak, she works to find alternatives so we don't cut down really old and beautiful trees and turn them into pizza boxes.
Right. I get
Which
that.
seems like a good idea.
That sounds like important work, actually.
And
Yeah.
in terms of like her connection to the TED community, which we are also a part of, in April, she received $60 million of funding from the Audacious Prize.
60 million?
Yeah. So you were talking about trees and money.
That's the cash. That's Kendrick Lamar. That is money trees. That's 60 million.
Yeah. So we now know what you're going to be asking her about.
Yeah, listen, I'm ready to go. Hello, welcome, Nicole.
I guess I want to jump right in and ask you to tell us in your words just a little bit about Canopy before we ask lots of questions that won't make any sense at all.
Unless someone
win
knows.
that award.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
Tell us
we're
the-
gonna get to the award, but first, because that is what I would also want to know about.
Right.
Tell us about the money.
Tell us about the money, but Canopy, tell us about that.
First off, Canopy 101. All right.
Please.
So Canopy is a solutions-driven NGO. We work to protect the world's forests, and with that, the world's climate, biodiversity, and help advance frontline community rights. And we do that by harnessing the purchasing influence of the marketplace. So we work with 700 really large corporate customers of the forest products industry. And a model of change is based on that business adage that the customer's always right. And the more money you spend, the more right you tend to be in terms of your suppliers. And so we work with big companies like H&M and Walmart and, companies that use a lot of paper-based packaging, a lot of wood-based textiles like rayon and viscose.
That's what I was going to ask. What are you said forest-based
textiles.
Like,
yeah.
So what do we mean by this?
I know, it isn't an intuitive
question.
connection, right? That something that can give you a splinter, like wood, or a tree that stands tall in a forest can actually end up as a soft, silky fabric that's next to your skin. So the inside of my suit jacket lining here in New York for Climate Week, or potentially even your dress, could have rayon or viscose or modal.
Viscose. I know viscose.
See?
Not personally, but yeah.
Right.
I know of the material.
Up close and
Yeah,
personal because
yeah.
it's in a lot of the clothing that we wear. It's the third largest textile type that
No
we
way.
make clothing
And
with.
these all comes from forests.
300 million trees are cut down every year to make textiles, viscose and rayon textiles, and it's going to double within the next decade.
But also things like paper and
Packaging,
packaging as well.
Yeah, all the cardboard boxes that, things get shipped around the world in. Like when you order online, you get 7 times more packaging than if you're in a bricks and mortar purchase.
Wow.
All of that packaging, all of the, pizza boxes, the takeaway containers, the stationery, all those kinds of things. There are more than 5 billion trees that are cut down every year to make paper packaging products more broadly. That's a lot. That's a lot of trees. That's a lot of forests.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people like us, it'll be the
Yes.
first time we're thinking about this.
Yes.
Tell us about, like, I guess the status quo and like how that's negative. Like, if we really haven't thought about this for the first time, because obviously you're trying to transform those systems and supply chains and what those companies use. But what is the thing that's bad that's happening right now or has been happening, in terms of the climate impacts of this kind of stuff?
Sure. So when we think of climate change, oftentimes what we think about are, use of fossil fuels, bad. We need to stop that, move over to renewables as fast as possible. But keeping forests standing is 30% of the climate solution. There are these other really carbon intensive
And why is
supply
that
chains.
for someone who, like, again, just thinking like, that seems like, okay, yes, it's nice to keep forests standing. It seems like it's a nice
We
thing
like
to do.
orangutans.
We like it. But why is it a climate solution?
Because there's an incredible amount of carbon that actually sits both in the trees, the above surface kind of things that are in a forest, as well as the soils and the peatlands that forests grow in. And so when we go in and we mow down a forest to send it off to a mill to then make pizza boxes or T-shirts, what we do is we release this massive amount of carbon into the atmosphere, as well as lose the sequestration kind of superpower that forests provide us with over time. Like, they're literally, our shields. They're not only the lungs of the planet in that they suck in carbon dioxide and they put out oxygen, but they're also our shields against climate change because they actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so when we log them, then we're creating a massive release of carbon, and we're diminishing our ability to actually pull what's in the atmosphere out.
And you said, how many trees did you say it was that we cut down a year for textiles?
For textiles, it's 300 million trees a year.
300 million trees a year. This is the place where I always get confused. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this question, but because I have no concept of like how many trees there actually are. So like percentage wise, if we cut down 300 million trees, how many trees are left? Like, is that a big proportion of how many trees there are?
So this is where it starts to get a little bit kind of forest tree geeky.
Okay, right. Which is good. We like that.
Yeah. So about half of what's cut down to make, be it rayon textiles or paper-based packaging, half of that comes from really high carbon, high biodiversity value forests. So those are the ones that we really want to prioritize to
We shouldn't be doing that.
keep standing, conserve them in a way that's just for local communities, as well as, there are going to be some areas within that have already been degraded, and we need to actually restore them back so that for biodiversity, for climate stability. Of the kind of commodities that, forests are cut down for, most of it goes into paper and packaging, but textiles are a really aggressive growing part of the value chain. And so supply chains, they don't sound very sexy. Like, they're a little kind of out of sight, out of mind. We go
Speak for yourself. No.
We go into a clothing store. We don't necessarily, when we look at the price tag, we don't necessarily think, oh my goodness, this has come from, orangutan habitat or traditional communities' lands, indigenous communities' traditional lands. But that's the hidden cost, be it with, like the box that it arrives in or the actual garment or piece itself. And so that's our work.
Something that surprised me as I found out more about this, I always assumed that the trees we cut down to use in all of this were trees that were like planted for this. They were like, I don't know if they were like purposeful for it, like a Christmas tree lot.
Like farmed trees.
Yeah. And then you find out that there are like ancient forests that we're cutting down to make boxes, and it feels like that doesn't feel right. Like, it just feels like, what are we talking
Sacrilegious
about?
almost?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like odd.
Disrespectful.
And so I'm just wondering, is that like just to explain a bit of that, because that just doesn't. I feel like that's not what when people, because we all know intuitively that some of these products come from
thought the same thing.
trees. Yeah.
I mean, for when we first started working in the fashion industry to transform viscose production, to be honest, when we first started off, we didn't even know that viscose came from trees, right? Like that in itself was a discovery for us. But we definitely, when I first started Canopy, whenever it was, many gray hairs ago, 24 years ago, I, like many people, thought that, sure, paper comes from trees, but it's coming from plantations. But the fact is that, between a third to half, depending on which part of the world you're in, is actually coming from these really biologically important forest ecosystems rather than plantations. And so that's the thing that we need to actually stop so that we can have forests do what we need them to do for everything else, which is, provide the foundations for life on Earth.
That is wild. Consider, like, when you actually consider, look at me, but when you consider that the amount of packaging that we use that we don't actually need to use.
Single use often, right?
Yeah.
Like comes in, goes straight into the recycling bin
Yeah,
at best,
yeah.
or potentially into the garbage. Yeah. The fact that we're still mowing down 400-year-old trees to make kind of packaging, shipping boxes, pizza boxes, and T-shirts, that's partly why I started Canopy, because it was like, we are smarter than this.
Yeah, this seems avoidable. Like, it seems unnecessary.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is the perfect moment for you to tell us, like, because this is just so awful. You're just like,
this is bad.
because you're like a pizza box, or we've all ordered something from the company we won't name, the box is like giant, and then there's loads of paper for a USB key
There
or
it
something
is.
nuts.
Yeah.
And it just feels very upsetting, actually.
Right.
So tell us about this, like the solutions you're developing. Because I love the way you said it. Like, we're smarter than this.
We are smarter than this. And it's not that we don't know what to do, right? It's really just about scaling the solutions. So we work in a couple of ways. So we work with these really large corporate customers of packaging, of paper, of viscose, companies like Zara and H&M and Levi's and, Marks and Spencer's and luxury brands like Stella McCartney or LVMH. And we help them to develop cutting edge environmental policies because they're the ones that spend, millions or tens of millions of dollars every year on packaging or viscose. And so they have the ability to influence their suppliers to create the economic incentives for them to change business as usual, to stop logging in high carbon value forests or to stop logging in endangered species habitat, and to actually prioritize transitioning over to lower carbon, more circular feedstocks. And there is such an abundance of lower carbon, lower impact feedstocks, right? Like, there's 100 billion items of clothing that are produced every year, and 60% of it's in landfill within a year. Right?
100 billion. What even is that number? How big is 100 billion? How many millions is in a billion?
Now, I know, I always get I have to pull out my calculator actually for that.
1,000 millions in
a billion.
A billion.
And there's 100 billion.
Yeah. So there are 10,000. No, 100 billion is 100,000 millions, right? Is that right?
Let's go with the X.
Yeah, I was gonna,
It's somewhere between
someone get
10,000
their
and 100,000
calculator out.
million. We're gonna figure it out.
That's
We'll splice in the right number.
wild.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling number. And so you can imagine like the amount of pollution that's associated
Oh
with
my
that, the
gosh.
stress on landfills, with it. The clothing generally just degrades into methane, and as everybody on your podcast would know, right? Like, as part of
don't
this
like
community, methane bad.
Methane's a bad one.
Yeah, right? Really, really potent. And so you can take that clothing and recycle it, have it broken down in these next gen pulp mills, and turned into next season's clothing, right? Like, there's agricultural residues that are left over after the food grain harvest every year. There are mountains and mountains of straw and other agricultural residues. There's 100 million tons of straw left over every year after the harvest in India. It gets burnt. It creates 40% of the air pollution that chokes Delhi every year. So public health crisis, incredible greenhouse gas emissions, perfect for making boxes and packaging and paper. And so it's for even waste, like the kind of byproduct of industrial food production. So we've got one technology innovator that we work with who basically takes the waste from coconut water production and can make basically a yarn filament that you can make clothing out of. Whoa. And so these are fibers, so to speak, that we generally treat as waste in our society. Right. But in nature, there's no such thing as waste, right? Like everything's part of a perpetual cycle of life. And so it's about how do we diversify the fiber basket rather than continuing to rely exclusively on forests to provide the fiber for making all the things that are part of modern day life, paper and packaging and clothing. Let's use these lower carbon alternatives that would otherwise just be creating additional stress on communities, on our climate, on biodiversity. So that's what we call it Canopy Next Gen Solutions. And we're a big believer that solutions are sexy and that they're here and ready to be scaled. So that's a big priority for our work, is how do we actually accelerate the transition from this take, make, waste production system that we've currently got, which is really a relic of the 19th and the 20th century, and how do we kind of really accelerate that transition to more circular next-gen production?
And so to just for my own clarity, the solution is not never cut down any trees ever again, but we need to stop cutting down at least half of the amount of trees that we're cutting down for it to be sustainable, or to return to some kind of situation where we're not just destroying everything and wiping everything out.
Yeah, so we at Canopy, we ground our work in what kind of the scientists are saying is ecologically needed.
Right.
And then we work our way back and work out how do we actually get there. And more than half of our society's environmental footprint is wrapped up in supply chains.
Right.
And a company, like 80% of their footprint is attributable to the raw materials that they make their widgets, their wadgets, their clothing, their product from. Right. And so that's why we really focus there. And the scientific community are really clear. We need to be, like, basically there's a nature needs half movement within the scientific community, which is basically saying we need to protect and or conserve 50% of the world's land and oceans between basically 2030 to 2050. And the priority needs to be on keeping those kind of intact old growth forests standing, and the marinescapes that are in good stead protected. And then once we've done that, restoring the landscapes that are really important to restore back. So to do that, we have to take the pressure off them to be providing the fiber for, all the things for everything else.
We don't even really need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we're aiming for, and that's what we've been supported by the Audacious project this year to achieve by 2030. Actually, by 2033, we're going to have displaced all ancient and endangered forest fiber from clothing and paper and packaging and pulp, and have a full 1/3 of forest fiber taken out of this supply chain. Like, we see next gen as the off-ramp from our reliance on forest.
And one last one, what's the difference between an ancient and endangered forest and a not ancient and endangered forest? Is there such a thing as a not ancient and endangered forest?
Yeah, it's a kind of a prioritization. So ancient and endangered it's pretty broad classification. There's a lot of geeky scientific kind of definitions around.
You keep saying that, but this sounds interesting. I feel like maybe I'm a
love it.
So, maybe I am. I feel like this is like
your niche.
my induction to the club.
There we go. I love it. So they're ancient and endangered forests is an umbrella term for their high carbon value forests, their endangered species habitat, their anthropogenically rare forest types, because maybe they were kind of once quite common, but they've been logged and degraded, and so now they're kind of very small. They're intact forests, so primary forest ecosystems, so a variety of different classifications that fall under that umbrella.
What's an example of a tree that was common and is not common anymore. Sorry, Mary.
Yeah, I love it. Look at you.
Okay,
You're really
yeah,
like, you're
I
looking for
just
your
find it
geeky
really
badge.
interesting.
Yeah, you're getting,
I find it- No, but do you have an example of one?
Yeah,
it's
so
not
it's-
like a pine tree.
Yeah. No, pine
Okay.
trees are pretty. But temperate rainforests used to only cover a very small percentage of the earth, and like they're very high biomass forests. You used to find temperate rainforests down the west coast of North America.
Is temperate a type of tree?
Temperate is a kind of ecosystem.
Okay.
So hyper wet, coastal.
Right.
So you get really big trees where it takes like 10 people with their arms outstretched to kind of
Hug the
circle
tree.
it.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's a communal tree hugging experience.
Yeah.
And they've been targeted because there's such big
Massive.
biodense kind of forest ecosystems, and so now there's like a very, very small percentage of them left.
I would say the closest in my life that I've ever come to like having a real spiritual experience is walking in the redwoods in California
Yeah.
in the morning. It's like something else. These are like so old and they're so big and they're so like delicate in some ways and massive in others, and they're just something else. So they're quite special, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the inspiration for churches and
Yes.
cathedrals came from, right? The original cupola
Yeah.
where was the canopy of the forest. And I think we've often thought of forests and trees as these kind of inert things that just kind of stand around.
Yeah, they just exist. They're just there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's been some really beautiful science that's been done that kind of shows how forests are a community. They kind of like, you know, they share nutrients. They send messages to each other. They nurture. Like there's a kind of a mutualism, a kind of a support and a sharing system.
Yeah.
I'm a big, you're a tree geek, but I'm a forest geek. I love forests.
Yeah. I'm working my way up to forests.
Yeah, there you go.
I find them a little bit intimidating. Yeah.
Okay, I have so many questions about all of this. I want to start by just understanding, and I don't know if we may cut this out, but I want to start by asking about how this work also relates to kind of the people on these lands that are being. I feel like there's so many of these interconnections, and I'm curious to know how you or your work works with them, and what that is the implication for the people on the land.
Yeah. I feel like I'm when I first came to this work, and I used to be a physiotherapist and an elite level athlete, so nothing to do with kind of tree hugging or transforming supply chains and business. But, I came to this work because I care deeply about justice, and I care deeply about our natural world. And just a recognition that we don't have very fundamental human rights: clean air, stable climate, clean water, stable food supply chains, unless we actually have planetary stability. And then on top of that, you've got indigenous and traditional communities that have lived in forests for, millennia, hundreds of years, or thousands and tens of thousands of years. And oftentimes what's happening is their traditional lands are being logged without any consent on their part. Like we work alongside local NGO communities who work with frontline communities that have for 20 years, 25 years been struggling to actually have autonomy over their traditional lands, and have just time and time again seen their rights basically literally rolled over by a bulldozer. They've lost livelihoods. They've been subject to intimidation, to criminalization, and just, I think, especially I had a conversation with the Grand Chief of the Cree Grand Council and Nation just a couple of weeks ago, and
Of the Cree.
yes, they're one of the indigenous nations in the northern boreal forest.
Okay.
And for many indigenous nations and peoples around the world, right, the separation between people and nature, it's an artificial separation, right? And so it's an affront to them to their being and to their culture when their traditional lands are violated.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I imagine that's essentially a declaration of war, but a declaration of war against people who don't have the resources to fight a war.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like they're, in remote areas. And so it's really, I think what happens with our work is that because the international marketplace is such a powerful driver of change, when it starts to put rights and sustainability as part of the kind of criteria for purchasing or continued kind of purchasing, that tends to help raise kind of or give space for those voices, be it the voices of nature or the voices of frontline communities in a way that they haven't historically had access to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love the intersectionality of the work, right? Like when you're looking at you're looking at like, it feels like you're bringing these big, massive corporations and their supply chains that are super technical and like grounded in like all of this, markets and economics to the rights of these communities, to the, to like the land and almost in a way, removing some of the intellectual barriers where we've separated all these things out, but actually the only way to think about them is to think about them as a whole.
Yeah, that's how we've managed to back ourselves into this very kind of weird corner that we've got ourselves into.
So this is what I want to. So I know that Ben wanted to talk about this before he realized he was a tree geek.
Yeah. Now I'm just
Welcome
about the
to
trees.
the club.
Thank you. Thank you.
You get a badge.
So honored.
So obviously you mentioned earlier you were part of the Audacious process, and for people who don't know, that is part of TED's kind of one of their incredible projects where they look to bring philanthropic support to projects around the world that are looking to do something really audacious, right? That is big, that is world changing. And they've backed a number of amazing climate projects. We've had a number of them on the podcast. Drive Electric, that's looking to transform the global road transportation, just as an example. And so will you tell us a bit about, I guess maybe start at the end, not the end, but the big announcement, and then just a bit of that process and what Audacious is going to enable you to be able to do.
Oh my God, so much.
First of all, we want to also hear about the number, right?
Yeah.
All right, tell us the number. Audacious, being part of the Audacious community is a game changer for us, right? I started Canopy with an $1,800 budget. Now, albeit that was a while ago, but
even with inflation, it's still not huge.
It's I'm not talking about
1,800 is 1,800.
Yes, 1,800.
That's not a lot of money. That's actually not a lot of money.
I could do this.
Yeah. So we just and the Audacious project for this year was announced at TED in April. We were one of 10 in this year's cadre of really spectacular kind of projects. So if anybody hasn't kind of checked it out yet, then they should.
They are amazing.
Yeah. But we're the recipient of $60 million between now and 2030.
No way.
I know.
No way. What? I mean, in fairness to you, the work that you're doing is, if we're going to fund something,
thank you.
That sounds like work that's worth being funded. 60 million.
Yeah.
Is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a 2.5 to 3x change for us.
That's huge.
It is.
My God.
Yeah. So when I say it's a game changer, it really is a game changer for us. And I cried immediately when they told me, but such an incredible act of generosity and an investment of trust of, this is a turnaround decade. We need to be all hands on deck. And we feel like we have confidence that you have a bold strategy and the ability to implement it. Let's not have capacity or lack of capacity continue to be sort of like an obstacle. And so we are running with it.
So you're going to save a lot of forest and a lot of people and a lot of planet.
That's the plan. Yeah.
My gosh.
So
Congratulations.
yes,
Thank you.
I mean, it
Thank
is.
you.
Well done.
Yeah.
It is. And audacious is probably one of my favorite parts of TED. Actually, I have to say, as just like a
It's
fan
magic.
of TED, it is, because it just says like this should not be the barrier.
Yep.
Like there are things like where we haven't figured out what to do, or where there are like political complications or whatever, but like the money should not be the barrier, and then
Yeah.
resources, generosity. So I love it. Big shout out to audacious.
Yeah.
we love you. But what is it? What does this allow you to do? Like, what are you planning to do with it? I mean, it's massive. It's a game changer, as you said.
60
What-
million.
How
do you even plan that?
Yeah.
So for us, it's really focused on accelerating or compressing the timeline over which we scale these
Right.
next gen solutions,
Right.
and then take that kind of off, kind of the alleviation in pressure off forests
Right.
into actually translating it through into, community-led and informed kind of conservation-based economies and conservation of those forests. So that's what it's
Right.
towards. By 2033, we're aiming to have 60 million tons of next-gen pulp, which is totally geeky, I know. Sorry,
We're here for it.
trash talking geeks again.
yeah, you
Affectionately,
out of your mouth.
we consider ourselves geeks at Canopy. But 60 million tons of next gen on market by 2033, and so that means that basically what we're going to have is hundreds of new next-gen pulp mills around the world. So rather than huge swaths of forest continuing to be cut, we'll be able to use the hundreds and hundreds of millions of tons of old jeans and T-shirts that are ending up in landfill.
Yeah.
We'll be able to take the hundreds of millions of tons of, banana leaves and straw that isn't needed to maintain the organic integrity of the soil, but would otherwise be burnt, and have that kind of made into the packaging that everything gets sent around the world in. That's the focus for us with Audacious, and we see that happening by really strengthening the market pull through, because there has to be a value proposition. There has to
Right.
be a market for these, for a new industry, for a new supply chain to be built. We see that happening by building these early kind of regional hubs. Like normally, like we could have 10 new mills built like within the next 2 years, but if they're built basically at like far-flung corners of
Right.
the planet, you don't end up with enough critical mass to
Right.
make it worthwhile for there to
impact isn't
be
what it-
textile recycling systems put in place. And so aggregating where those early next-gen hubs happen. And we see India, North America, UK, Europe, Brazil, Southeast Asia, and China as being really great candidates for these early regional hubs of production. And then we just need to mobilize investment because these mills are big honking industrial facilities and they cost $200 million to build a single mill. Right. And because they're new technology, it means that, investors are kind of like a little tentative around writing those checks to start off with.
Get over it.
Exactly. So that's why the customer company is being really committed to it's really important. It helps de-risk it.
Yeah.
But we need to move $78 billion, that's billion with a B, into this transition within the next decade. And so that's what Audacious is helping us to do.
Yeah.
We can bump out our capacity. We used 2.5 years ago, we had 15 people on the team. Since February, since we heard the news, we've added we've had a 66% increase in our team. We've just we're starting to run.
Bringing in those great minds into it as well. And I guess, this is where I have learned over the years that I understand the real impact of this scale of philanthropy is it does de-risk and it unlocks. You can't just go straight to that 78 billion, right?
No.
But you can leverage the 60 million to make it more possible. It is actually incredible.
Yeah. That is because for me, I think this is the first time I've understood financially the scale that we're looking at. I think hearing the numbers and having the conversation, it's the first time I've realized that 60 million, where in my mind, 60 million solves all of the problems in the world. But 60 million, we've done it. We've got the money. It's finished. We fixed it. We've saved the forest. But that doesn't even really put, like, obviously increases your capacity to do the work.
Exactly.
But doesn't really put a dent in
Well,
the
that's
work
that's the thing.
Less than one factory.
Yeah.
Like, less than one mill.
Yeah, and that 60 million spread out over the next 6 years comes to us as a philanthropic donation.
Right.
And what we need to do is mobilize $78 billion in investment.
Right.
And so what we're looking to do now, we're developing a whole kind of investment strategy.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so philanthropy can play a role in that. So, it can be first loss capital or catalytic capital,
Right.
or that helps then incentivize along with the market kind of
Maryam's
pull through.
like, right, and I have no idea what those things mean, but I'm going to take your word for it.
But that can incentivize then, like big pension funds,
Right.
institutional investors to kind of that are perhaps a little bit more conservative around risk into the space.
I think this is really amazing. And so I'm curious to know, like, is there anything people can look out for? Like, like sometimes you see things and you think, oh, that's part of this. Is there something people, like just normal people like us in the world, can look out for to know that it's part of this movement?
Yeah, for sure. So you should be looking for brands that are taking leadership on it. So checking out their website, looking at their socials, making sure that, and if they're not communicating about being on the front edge of this, then, you can always ask them, are they? And they're just being modest about it. If you're a fashion lover, make sure you look at your labels. If you're going into into a store to buy something new, then kind of these things tend to really now be kind of on the label or on the hang tag. So there's a whole bunch. Like you can go into a variety of different brand stores, and you will see a hang tag on it that says that this is made from circulose or it's made from recycled kind of textile or things like that. So those are the things to really keep an eye out for.
Great. This is awesome.
I'm in awe of this, really, actually.
I mean, listeners, you won't know this, and Nicole, I don't think you'll know this either, but like basically every single person I know has been like, have you talked to Nicole yet? It's going to blow your mind. Have you done it? And now I pretty much understand why. Just the look on Ben's face. I mean,
this
it's
is
incredible.
Incredible. And interestingly,
You have me blushing.
Honestly, because before this conversation, I would have thought the incredible thing was the money. And now I don't think that at all. Actually, the money's pretty not insignificant because it's representative of something that's really important, but it's the actual work that is like unbelievable. This is like really going to actually change the world, like in real time, in ways that are like, I'm going to start going and hugging trees and stuff. I feel like I've been converted. I really don't like nature now. And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
This is an opportunity for us to all be a bit human, and for us to ask you if you have a climate confession.
Oh my God. Yes, unfortunately. I mean, I think we all live on the planet, right? Like none of us are saints, or very few people are. So what would I pick as my top climate confession? I don't have a car, and it's partly for this reason, but I really like driving quite fast with good sound system.
Oh, yeah. You do give that vibe. Give that vibe.
Yeah. So I'm really lucky that one of my good friends now has an electric Mini. So it does help us raise that it does. But I mean, that's that, I mean, I know that if you are going to drive, then there's there's an ideal sort of speed limit that you're meant to stay under. I find that kind of... So
fast cars, and not just air pollution, but also sound pollution, noise pollution. You doubled up on that one.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's brilliant. Our climate confession, as always, I think for this series is that we are in New York, so all of us got on a plane.
Yes.
So everyone's bored of that one from us for now.
We went into Starboni's this morning, and we shout out to Starboni's, and I used a takeaway cup even though I was drinking in, and then just left it there for them to dispose of it. So I'm sure that's bad in some way, but I'll fix it. I won't do it again. That's become my habit now. I'm just like, don't worry, I won't do it again. And then I'll just do it again. But we'll resolve it.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us. This has been just the most wonderful and fun and uplifting conversation.
Really?
And lovely to hear
Yeah.
about it. And I think it's just really cool to know that there are really interesting, great people doing really amazing things that are working and that we're scaling them up. I think that for me is always the source of like energy and optimism. And I think it will be for people listening. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I think it's one of those things that none of us can solve these big issues by ourselves, right? Like it all happens in partnership, be it working in the supply chain or, helping people to work out how they plug in. So yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
Thank you so much. Oh, and remember, stay curious. Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the reviews section, and we'll shout out a few next time. And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Colter, artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus,
Curation by Maryam Pasha,
mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshty,
music also by Ben Beheshty,
presented by Ben Hurst,
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.